Well, let's go now to Ali Abunimah, who's the co-founder of the Electronic Intifada and the author of The Battle for Justice in Palestine. He joins us now from Amman in Jordan. Good to have you with us, Ali. Now, we've been hearing from our correspondents throughout the day, both in Gaza and the West Bank, that the Israeli bombardment of Gaza is just intensifying. How do you see this ending? How can this latest conflict end between the two sides?
Well, this is a dynamic that is going to continue to repeat itself. Israel cannot exist without severe violent repression of Palestinians, what Israeli leaders call mowing the lawn, which is every few years to massacre Palestinians, to inflict destruction and suffering on them in order to drive into the heads of Palestinians that any resistance, any desire for liberation is futile, and their only choice is to live under Israeli rule, under Israeli siege, under Israeli occupation, with no hope of liberation whatsoever. And we're seeing that Palestinians, like any other human beings, are refusing to get this message, that no matter what Israel does, Palestinians are determined to resist, determined to exercise their right to resistance and self-defense against occupation, and are becoming more and more adept at challenging Israel. Of course, they're not equal to Israel, but they are increasingly able to impose a cost on Israel for its war crimes, which are being committed before the whole world.
As you say, these attacks by Israel on Gaza seem to be sadly routine. We had one in 2008, another in 2014, and this one that we're currently seeing in 2021. But let's reflect on what was the trigger point of this latest conflict. It came about after days of escalating tensions between Israeli security forces and Palestinians in East Jerusalem, and we know that culminated in a violent raid by Israeli police on the Al-Aqsa Mosque, which injured dozens of Palestinian worshippers. Could all that have been avoided?
Well, that's a really important question, and it brings us to the political context for this, because let's think back to less than a year ago when Israeli leaders were triumphantly signing so-called peace deals with the rulers of the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain and Morocco, with the tacit support of Saudi Arabia. And they all thought that the Palestinian cause was dead, that the Palestinians were finished. There was nothing they could do. So this emboldened Israel, with, of course, the support of the United States and the European Union, emboldened Israel to escalate its aggression in Jerusalem, escalate the ethnic cleansing in neighborhoods like Sheikh Jarrah and Silwan, and escalate its attacks and incursions on Al-Aqsa. Israel's miscalculation was to think that Palestinian resistance factions in Gaza would not dare to respond to Israel's aggression in Jerusalem. Israel was wrong about that. And what we've seen is that Palestinians across historic Palestine, that includes Gaza, the West Bank, and the cities in the areas of Palestine that were occupied in 1948, so-called Israel, are rising up in unison and showing that they are united in protesting, resisting, and fighting for their rights against what is a settler colonial regime, and even, according to a very mainstream organization like Human Rights Watch, an apartheid regime. So the question is, what was the response of the civilized world to apartheid in South Africa? It was to support resistance, to support boycott, to support sanctions. And now the question in 2021 is, what will the world do in the face of an Israeli apartheid which is even more cruel and even more willing to shed innocent blood than the apartheid regime in South Africa?
Now, while the Israeli bombardment of Gaza continues, we are seeing some significant civil unrest in Israel itself between Arab Israelis and the Jewish population. Now, this violence is actually looking like it's dealing quite a significant blow to Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's opponents, who were really looking to unseat him. Is there a connection with Netanyahu's flagging political popularity and the violence that we're seeing now?
Well, the violence within Israel, I think it should not be misconstrued as sort of civil unrest. What we've been seeing overwhelmingly, in the overwhelming number of cases, is organized gangs of Israeli Jewish extremists attacking Palestinian citizens of Israel. And this includes, by the way, gangs of settlers who have come in from the West Bank into Israeli cities to attack and lynch Palestinians in really horrific scenes that some have even compared to Kristallnacht, the attacks on Jews in Germany in the 1930s. So this is encouraged by Netanyahu. The extremist settlers who wanted to march through occupied East Jerusalem, as they routinely do, shouting death to the Arabs and Muhammad is dead, are part of the political base of Benjamin Netanyahu. So all of this violence is with his tacit support. And my reading of the situation there is that the more there is this ultranationalism and extremism in Israel, the more Benjamin Netanyahu feels strengthened, and the more he thinks that the Israeli Jewish public will feel frightened and radicalized and turn to him as a strong and well-known figure for support. So I think he sees this violence as actually helping him keep his grip on power.
Okay, Ali Abunimah in Amman, we will have to leave it there, but thank you so much for your analysis here on the TRT World.